Hey, Feisty listeners, Feisty founder and CEO Sarah Gross here. I am super excited to let you all know that our brand new suite of digital courses is officially live and on demand starting June 9th. And these courses are designed for one purpose: to give active women like you the tools, knowledge, and support you actually need to thrive. For far too long, women's health has been treated like an afterthought. But not here, not anymore. Whether you're dialing in your nutrition, building strength, navigating hormonal shifts, or just trying to stay sharp and feel like yourself, you'll find expert-led, science-backed courses built for real life and real bodies. And to celebrate this launch, you will get 25% off all courses through the end of June. Check them out now at livefeisty.com. The link will be in the show notes, because your health deserves more. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, all Feisties. We are back for our third and final episode of the IVF series with Jill Van Gene. Jill, good morning. How are you?
Good morning. I'm good.
Yeah, so I'm excited about this episode in particular. You know, we looked around for a little while to try to find sort of an elite level athlete who was training at like perhaps a higher level than most of us would think about, who could come in and talk about her story and give her, you know, sort of tell her story. So tell us a bit about Annika.
Yeah, so Annika is a six-time world champion mountain biker. She has a fascinating story. I think her coming into sport is not a sort of conventional one. So I found that aspect to be really interesting. And one of the things that I have been interested in, especially around IVF, is when high-level athletes or any type of person that's in athletics, many times we're with career coming in, we want to prioritize our careers and put off building a family a bit later than our previous generations might have considered. So I think it's really interesting now with so many people deciding to wait on family building and then coming into IVF late and then starting to realize that it's just not a straight line. And especially with pro athletes, because their bodies are really the way that they make their career, going, not only falling pregnant and going through the pregnancy process, but also getting into IVF has a huge impact on their physicality. So in some ways, I think a lot of athletes have to be in the mindset to end up having to give up parts of their career in order to have a family, because there's, the potential for so many different body changes. So I find this a really interesting topic. Annika was candid and really shares her experience. I think people are just going to really enjoy hearing not only her personal story of coming into sport, but also of making a decision to pursue family building and IVF and some of the pitfalls and the joys that come along with that.
Oh, fantastic. That's a great intro. Well, I think we should leave it there and let folks listen to the interview. Thank you so much, Jill, for co-hosting this with me.
Yeah, it's been a real pleasure. Thank you.
Hey, Feisty people. CEO Sarah Gross here. I want to tell you about my favorite product for muscle strength and recovery, which has also become a favorite amongst all of my friends at CrossFit, Previnex's Muscle Health Plus. A few months ago, I started using it during my lifting sessions. We call it red juice at CrossFit, and it has helped my power, speed, and I've even put on some muscle mass, which has typically been really, really hard for me as an ex-endurance athlete. Muscle Health Plus contains creatine monohydrate, of course, but it also contains branched-chain amino acids and essential amino acids, plus some even more cutting-edge ingredients like HMB and estrogen, all of which are scientifically shown to increase muscle growth, recovery, and strength. So basically, it's a convenient, all-in-one formula that goes way beyond creatine alone. Unlike most supplement brands, Previnex tests everything with pharmaceutical-grade precision, and they also offer a 100% money-back guarantee. Try Muscle Health Plus today, and you can get 15% off your first order with the code PERFORMANCE at Previnex.com. That's performance for 15% off at Previnex.com.
So I'm joined today by Annika Langvad. She's a renowned Danish cyclist celebrated for her exceptional achievements in both mountain biking and road racing. She's a 6-time world champion in mountain biking, securing 5 titles in marathon events and 1 in cross country. And beyond her athletic pursuits, she's also a licensed dentist. She completed her studies in 2017 and initially retired from professional cycling in 2020, but made a remarkable comeback in 2025, winning her 6th Cape Epic title. And your career has just been distinguished by your versatility and your resilience and your commitment to excellence across multiple cycling disciplines. And Annika has also undergone a different type of marathon with in vitro fertilization. And she's going to join us today to talk us through a little bit about what it's like to be a professional athlete and grapple with fertility issues, the IVF process, and ultimately giving birth. So welcome. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much. It's nice to be here.
And just for the audience sake, because I know I mispronounced your last name, can you say it for me, please?
Yeah, it's not easy, so I'm not blaming anyone. Annika Langvad.
Thank you.
There we
go. Yeah, I don't think I have like the tongue muscles to do that. So I also have a complicated last name that never gets pronounced correctly, but it is a little easier. So
Gotcha.
Well, let's just jump in here. I would love for you to tell all of our listeners a little bit about what first drew you to your sport, what was your professional journey like, and just sort of take us back to the beginning of how you got into this career.
Yeah, where to start? So I think overall my journey into professional sport is it's not like the average one. I did not grow up in a family like who did any sort of sports on this level that I'm doing now. I moved to Copenhagen in 2006 to start my studies, and that's kind of when I got involved with cycling. I mean, I was looking for something to do next to the studies, and I'm gonna make a very long story very short, but eventually got into mountain biking. And you know, when you have a talent for something, it goes so fast, so quick at the beginning. So first I just kind of, really had a good time. When I started, there weren't really a lot of female athletes or cyclists at all, like in Denmark or also like internationally. So I was riding with the men. I just had a good time, being really in a nice environment that, I really liked. It was quite a contrast to the studies, which was like, very intense, very hard. And I felt like, I had a good time in my spare time, and it was more about using the body than the mind, and I kind of liked that. Started doing some races, first in Denmark, then in the near international races, and when you have a talent, it just skyrockets. So within a few years, I was on a German team, and a few years after that, I was riding. I had Specialized, the bicycle brand, as a sponsor, and that kind of led me to join their international team, which I've been riding for actually my whole career.
Fascinating.
Since retiring in 2020, I was really burned off, fed up with the whole thing. Been working full-time as a dentist ever since, and then this year, 2025, I'm back. But it's not like a traditional comeback, because it's a very different discipline that I'm now kind of dipping my toes into.
A different discipline. And how is it different?
It's a different sport. So when I was a professional cyclist before, I was mainly an athlete within mountain biking. It's true that one year in 2019, I did some road races with a World Tour team called SD Works now. And what I'm doing now in 2025 is gravel, which is it's a growing discipline within cycling, very, very popular. And actually, I just a few days ago returned from one of the biggest American races unbound.
Amazing. That's amazing. Okay, well, that's so, I just love the fact that you came into this in such a natural way, that you hadn't been training as like a child or a young person, that you just kind of picked up the sport. Do not have those talents. I constantly pick up new sports, and I'm sort of a jack of all trades. I can kind of do everything a little bit okay, but what a remarkable journey you've had into such like a niche sport, and a sport that's so underrepresented by women. So, I mean, it's really amazing that you've been on the vanguard of females in this type of sport. So congratulations on all of that success.
Thanks.
Really incredible. So the topic of the day, I suppose, is how you came into professional sports, and then also at what point did you start thinking about your life beyond your athletic career, including your own family planning?
Yes, in 2016, and that's when me and my now husband we started like thinking about starting a family. It so happened that in 2016 I won a world champion title, the Olympic distance. Like that's the discipline I've only won once, and it was a pretty unique thing to do. And then we were like, okay, actually it's pretty cool because you get to wear, I don't know if you can see the rainbow jerseys behind me, you get to wear one of these when you race. And we were like, okay, actually let's do one more year. And then the end of that year, 2017, we then started to, try to see if we can start our own family. And it so turned out that it was not that easy at all.
Yes.
But, at the time we were like, I personally knew nothing about infertility. I don't even think I knew it was a thing. I didn't know anyone. I didn't hear about it. It was not really something that we spoke about, in my circles. So both me and my husband, we were like, oh, well, yeah, it doesn't seem like it's, just happens overnight. So, but let's just keep trying. And yes, probably because, that I was training as much as I were, and, traveling and putting my body under a lot of stress. So we were not too worried about it. Few years down the line, still nothing happened. Then after the 2020 season, that's when I retired from pro cycling. Mostly because I was just feeling really fed up, burned out. I was just like over it. Also because we wanted to start a family, and we didn't really think that it was something that we could combine with racing professionally. So I'm like, okay, let's close this chapter and focus on family. And only then, we started. I think we actually approached like a private fertility clinic here in Denmark straight away. In Denmark, we have a good healthcare system where you can actually, get these kind of treatments. But sometimes there's a bit of a waiting list. First they need to like investigate, then need to do, all the tests and stuff. So sometimes it takes some time. And we want to get going now. So we went to a private clinic and found out what our issues were and what we kind of needed to do. And it was straight up, okay, we need to do IVF, from the very first day.
Can you, I've got a couple questions here.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit more about like the issues that you faced? Like what was the issues that prevented you from falling pregnant?
Yeah. So like I said, when we had no clue what was going on, we thought, it was me and my body that wasn't working. But, both Thomas and I, we went through a lot of tests and examinations. And actually my egg reserve was quite high, and they couldn't really find any issues on my side. But Thomas, his sperm cell quality was super low, like not only low, but like crazy low.
Right.
That's why they said we need to do IVF. That's kind of the first thing that that's where we start. And it's a pretty high, I don't know if you're going to touch on this, but there's a kind of different, how you can kind of range the treatment options that you have.
Yeah.
like depending on how severe your issues are. And since ours were like pretty severe, how we would say, IVF was kind of where we entered on this kind of ranked list of treatments of options.
Yeah, it's interesting. We've covered a lot of the medical side with another guest on some of the treatment options, but it's interesting because there's so much ground to cover when you're starting to consider what your options are. And I think, like you said something earlier, which is one of the main reasons why I wanted to do this podcast, is that I think there are a lot of people out there that go into trying to conceive thinking that pregnancy is like, it's this just a very straightforward process, right? Like you find somebody, you guys get together, you know, you do the deed, and eventually you'll get pregnant. And it's just this sort of expectation that we're really set up for. And I think that, like, when I found out that we couldn't get pregnant, I was like, well, great, we go into IVF. And then that solves the problem. And that often it's not a straight line from like A to B. So I do understand that, like, there's so much to take in, and there's different, you can start with IUI, which is essentially artificial insemination, and then IVF, where the sperm and the egg are put together and they're fertilized. And this is like in layman's terms. And then there's ICSI, which is where they physically implant the sperm into the egg, I believe, and then it's almost like a forced fertilization. So there are different levels of this and different levels of complexity with IVF. And, you know, sometimes it'll take a few tries to get to a place that you find out what's going to be the appropriate option for you.
True.
And as you said, that time it takes to can be aggravating.
Yeah. So we started off with, ICSI, and I'll let you mention all the terms. And I don't know if we should touch on this now, but we then went through a few private fertility clinics, and one of the last ones that we used, that was Dr. That was pretty smart, and he was like, you know what, Thomas, we need to have you like examined even further, because then really didn't look into why, you know, the quality was low. It was just like, it is low, and, you know, period, nothing else. And then we went to like one of the only 2 hospitals that can make this kind of tests in Denmark. He got his his genetics tested,
right?
And turned out he had like an abnormality that, you know, kind of caused another issue that we need to go into, not only ICSI, but if there was something that, you know, some good eggs that came out the ICSI process, those eggs had to have a biopsy taken and then, you know, be frozen down, analyzed, and everything. So on top of, you know, the whole ICSI thing, we had another level. So all in all, it was just like a crazy process.
Yes. Yeah, we did genetic testing during our sort of on our process towards our second child. And we had a bit of a late loss, and they wanted, you know, it was so devastating that the remaining embryos, they were like, we should test these for abnormalities. But it came with this caveat, you know, and it was like, we didn't have that testing in Canada, so they had to be shipped off to the States. And I think one of the other things that people don't quite understand is that every time there is a new process involved with your embryos or your genetic material, it has the potential to degrade them or you lose them. And so it's quite a harrowing process, because you have these in your mind. This is what it felt like for me, was like we were sending all these little babies off and we were like, oh my gosh, like we could lose some of these, and they're so precious. And then even in that genetic testing process, they were like, even if we come out with these different grades of, you know, abnormal, or there's a mosaic where it's like, hey, it could be normal, it could also not be normal. And then there's like, you know, these appear to be normal. They still can't, they're like, it's just not a guarantee, right? So you can do all of these things, but what's fascinating to me is that the precision with which people approach these fertility processes is not as precise as people think it is.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like, in my mind, I understand totally what you're saying. It's like very like, what? No, it either works or it doesn't. You know, it's like, we do this and then it works. But it's like, there's so much you can't control. And there's so much like, maybe not. It's eventually it's your choice. And you kind of live in that position that you you have to decide a lot of yourself based on like gut feeling, you know. For example, now we have some embryos that are frozen down still, and these tests, you know, the genetic tests kind of came out, how to say, like inconclusive. So it's not like working, that working is like inconclusive. And now it's up to us, like, do we want to use these eggs or not? Which is like crazy, you know?
Yeah.
You know so much and still you know so little. And, you know, in the end, it's up to, you know, us, ourselves.
Yes. Yeah. And I think that one of the, it's so interesting because on my second, we moved through all of the tested embryos that were supposedly testing well, and we failed on every single one of them. And we were doing doubles at that point. We were putting 2 embryos in.
Wow.
And I was in quite a deep cycle of like, all right, doesn't work, go again. Doesn't work, go again. Eventually we were down to our untested embryos, and voila,
Yeah, there
we
you go.
had a beautiful, very wild daughter.
Yeah.
But yeah, so there was, when I went into IVF, I felt like there was so much comfort in the fact that we were going into this deeply scientific medical process. And I think I was quite shocked to find that it's a lot of just vibes. And like, we're going to see if this works and if this sticks and if this doesn't. And we spoke on a previous episode of this fact that like you can be a little bit pregnant, which was a devastating realization for me, because I was like, but I'm pregnant. And they're like, well, your numbers are funny and they're not rising in the way, or they're rising too fast. And maybe it's a chemical pregnancy, but we can't tell until this time. And I was like, why did nobody ever tell me that being a little bit pregnant was a thing? And like IVF it has that very similar feeling. So
Totally.
yeah.
It's just, I love and I can relate to everything that you're saying.
Yeah.
So
yeah. Let's talk a little bit about how your identity as an athlete, and like you mentioned that in 2020 you got quite burnt out and you were sort of over it all. Can you talk a little bit about this tension between your athletic career and needing to move on, and then you know, trying to start a family, and how sometimes those things feel a little bit incompatible or they feel complicated?
and so where to start? Well, I think, you know, when we first tried to get pregnant, we had no knowledge that we needed to do this crazy IVF thing. So actually, when I stopped my athletic career, I mean, it was, we still tried to start a family. And I think in my mind, I always thought that if I were to get pregnant, I would like, you know, end my career, like not coming back. And it's a good thing now that within cycling, at least, I can see that things are really changing, and all the, you know, the teams are supporting their female athletes. It's become much more of a thing that, you know, you need to almost have this thing in your contract that says if you fall pregnant, then, you know, you still can, you don't lose your contract. It doesn't end that way. And in my time before, it was like, pregnancy was not a thing. I really thought, you know, I was dead sure that if I get pregnant, you know, that's where my career stops. It's like, but now, I mean, things have really changed, and it's so cool. It's so cool to see, you know, the teams supporting the female athletes. It's almost like if it's not in your contract, you know, it makes the team or the company look really, really bad.
Sure.
So, and it has flipped completely just recently, and it's really, really good. I don't know if I went a little bit off topic now.
That's so interesting. I have a sister who's a professional athlete in snowboarding, and her and her friends have done a lot of advocacy around this, because yes, you would lose your contract, and it was always a choice between, you know, pursuing these, like, your athletic career, and then having to like stop and try to have, you know, a family, and then hope that on the other end you can secure another contract. But then you're out of the sport for so long, and you haven't been training, and like, or not the level that you are accustomed to. And like, these are these unique problems that women face in the athletic field, is, you know, they just perform to a point, and then when they are no longer useful to a brand, they just sort of get, ushered out the door. So I think that's so incredible. Is this something that you're seeing specifically in cycling, or is this something that's more unique to Europe, maybe?
Good question. I see it definitely within cycling. I think the European teams and sponsors, maybe they have been a little bit ahead on this topic. I don't know much about other sports, so I don't know how that looks, but definitely for sure within cycling, it should be, and it is very much the case that if you're a female athlete, I don't know how it works with the men actually, but there is like some sort of, security, and you're not going to get, fired if you get pregnant, and you can come back, they allow for some time for you to actually, come back afterwards, which is so cool. And now that we're speaking about this, because I'm thinking like my situation, spending years and years and years in IVF, I mean, sometimes it's not that straightforward to, start a family. You need to, do a lot of treatments. And I cannot see how that could have been combined with training and racing on the highest level. Like, not at all. Because probably also, touch on this topic, but when you go through a treatment round, first of all, your body is a mess, before, during, after. And also you need to go in and out of the hospital all the time. You cannot combine that with racing and training. So that could be pretty next no if somehow that was integrated into the contracts as well. I'm putting it out there, for inspiration. That's something that should be looked upon.
Yeah, that's really incredible. I think that there is such a need for that type of advocacy for women in female sports because, I mean, I am not a professional athlete, but I, have done athletics my whole life. And we did a 24-hour relay race where I ran about 30 kilometers over the course of 20 hours with a team. And I was having to do injectables throughout it.
No
way. It was just this like process of like really being in those fertility treatments and pushing my body through, because also this was like, there was no opportunities to sleep during this either. So, because it was relay, and injecting myself in this like shitty little van that we were driving, and like really like, and that was such a small version of what I imagined that athletes go through when they're pursuing these options, and they are also within their athletic career and training, that like this would be an incredibly hard process. I mean, athletics is already so hard on your body. And then to add in these intensive hormonal changes. And I mean, people don't talk a lot about how many needles that you have to put in your body. And like, there's physical pain, bruising, muscle damage, all sorts of stuff that can happen during that time. So
and also just, the discomfort around your, ovaries and stuff. I mean, how can you even bounce and run with that? I could not. But I mean, you're talking about the physical side, but to be honest, I would say that almost the mental side is more crazy. I mean, those hormones make you, I just, felt like every time I went through a cycle, I just kind of lost myself more and more and more. And, having to, and your mind becomes so fragile. I mean, I could not see how I could combine it with, sports at the highest level, like doing injections and the hormones, and then have, boom, it's a lot.
Did you continue doing like training on the side, like after you retired?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I did. So I rode my bike a lot, and this is something that I really think we should also talk about in this episode. Sure. I'm sure you have it planned already, but the thing is that when you go through these crazy treatments, it's not like you can just remove it from your life. You kind of have to deal with it somehow. At least if you want to continue doing it. And for me, staying active was like a lifesaver because, I couldn't remove the discomfort in my life, but at least I could try to add something that I loved. You know what I mean? To kind of balance it out and even it out. So for me, cycling became, very much somewhere that I could go and just like switch up my mind and just like, enjoy it and be someone else than this person who was just in and out of hospital and treatments all the time. So that was actually sports and being active was life-saving in this throughout all of these years.
Yeah. And were there any like myths around sort of like fitness and athletics and fertility that you had to unlearn during this process? Like what you were told versus what you were able to do?
Yeah, it was so funny. So, like I said, went through, I think, 2 different private clinics, and then we ended up with, in our main, how to say, like main hospital in Denmark, like one of the, where they can do those really specialized treatments that we had to do. And every time they asked me, they asked me about, okay, so how much sports do you do per, how many hours per week and stuff like that, and their whole like treatment, examination around you. And I was always very open about it. And some of the first doctors were like, oh, that's too much, like completely stop it. And some were like, yeah, actually, we don't have any scientific, I would say, like result that says that you cannot do it, but just, do it reasonably. So bottom line is that some doctors were like really strict and said like, really go home, lie on the couch. And others were, you know what, there's no, you can do whatever you want, just do as you feel. Just avoid like hard discomfort and you're fine. And actually some of the first strict doctors, as I call them, those who told me to do nothing, I would cry whenever I had a conversation with them. Afterwards, I would just like break down and cry and like, okay, so you're taking away from me the only thing in my life that makes me happy. Oh, it was horrible. But the good thing is like the nice doctors, actually we met towards the end of my, our treatments at the hospital, our main hospital, and they were really cool. Those were the ones that were like, you know what? The most important thing is actually to survive this and to be in a mental good spot. So if doing sports make you happy, you should continue doing it. And I was like, my shoulders went from here to like, that was so good. And that's also going to be my advice, for anybody out there who goes through it, is like, really keep on doing whatever makes you happy. If it's sports, if it's whatever, something else, keep on doing it, because that will help you survive it all.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like when we were talking with Carla during our sort of medical episode, she talked a lot about how, stress is the major factor, like these cortisol levels, and how stress can really prevent pregnancy, or make it more difficult to fall pregnant. And also the fact that she has written these recommendations around what women are capable of doing in terms of physical activity throughout their fertility process and their pregnancies, and that she's had a very difficult time communicating that and getting that stuff to stick within the medical field. And like, I think ultimately and for me, athletics is a big part of my stress relief. And if it makes you happy, and that's the thing that's going to keep you from these high stress, because like not being stressed during IVF is not a realistic option. It is the most frustrating thing to hear. Like, you really need to like calm down and not stress about it. And you're like, great, I'm going to stress even more about this now, because like it's such a stressful process. So I think it's so interesting that like these two things combined, and like people throughout history have given birth and conceived under extraordinary circumstances. And, riding your bike or lifting some weights isn't the thing that's going to, it's not going to like prevent that from happening. So
not at all.
Maybe we could just take some time could you walk us through like the sort of particulars of your fertility journey from when you started and how many rounds you did, if you're comfortable talking about that, and sort of what that process was like. And I would love for you to dig a little deeper into like how you grappled with this as a couple, as a partnership, and like emotionally throughout this process.
Yes. So like I said, we eventually ended up with 3 different clinics. First 2 private ones, and then our public healthcare system, like our main hospital in Denmark. What is it actually called? Yeah. I think in total, like I said, I think I lost count towards the end. It may be something like 8 or 9 rounds. Yeah. I stopped counting. I would say. So yeah. And every time we did around, I think embryos that came up that were good were between 0 and 3. And only, I think that we ended up doing 3 rounds at our public hospital. That's where they could do the process that we needed to do, like the egg sorting. Is that what you call it? You know, what
Yeah.
you have the biopsy thing.
Yeah.
I think in total we had like three eggs or embryos that where they couldn't see any defects that were
Right.
actually, okay to transfer. And then the third egg was actually that was Flora. And before that round, well, actually already when we started at our public healthcare system hospital, the first thing they did was bringing up a donor, like donor cells,
Right.
sperm cells, like as if this is where this is gonna end. This is what you should mentally prepare yourself for. But still, you continue with our own cells, but just they planted the idea from day one, which
Yeah.
was also crazy thing because to kind of you have these ideas about what a family is.
Yeah.
And when all of a sudden, those are just kind of shoved out the window and something like really different is planted in your minds. It's it was a difficult kind of
Yeah.
thing to go through. And but actually, the more rounds we went through that were unsuccessful, of course, this option, the alternative, became a much more realistic thing because we're like, what, we cannot do this anymore. We were like really running on fumes towards the end of all this. And I think actually already before we got the embryo transferred that turned out to be Flora, we knew that it was going to be our last round and that we're probably going to go, towards the direction of donor cells. So,
Wow.
yeah, really. Mentally,
Yeah.
we were already like, what, this is going to be the last round. And actually, every time I had an egg transferred, I told you that I'd stayed active throughout the whole thing. But whenever I had something transferred, just a few days after that, I would like take it very easy, be very calm.
Oh, yeah.
Just not at least those days.
Don't move.
Yeah, I wouldn't go crazy those days.
Yeah.
But this time around, I had to go to Chile for specialized the bicycle brand that I'm with launched a new bike, and I had to go to a press event in Chile, which is like far away from here, like a long travel. And we were like, what, we cannot control this anyway. So I think a few days after having that egg transferred, I jumped on this plane, rode my bike for a week, had a few glasses of wine, ended up taking the pregnancy test in Chile, and then like looking at it like, there's something going on here. There's something going on here. Yeah.
Oh, that's like, it's so funny. I had a very similar experience. We transferred the last egg and I was so done. I've always described like the process of infertility. Like it's just this, every time you do it, you dive deeper into insanity. Like it breaks you further down and further down. And by the time I was done, I was like, I'd almost leveled out because I was just like a machine going through this. But I was so tired and I was in the process of like trying to sell my business and I was just broken. And I just like, we had a few more embryos left, but I was like, I can't leave them on the table. And I just remember thinking like, this is the last one. I can't go through another loss. I can't go through more disappointment. And I was the most stressed I've been like in almost my entire life. I was so stressed out and I was not eating well. I wasn't taking care of my body in any way. I was just in a really bad state and I just didn't care anymore. I was like, that's it. I had made my peace with having one child and I was like, this is like, he is enough and our family is enough and we can do this. And I think I mentioned this on a previous episode, but the day I tested positive for pregnancy was also the day I first tested positive for COVID. And I was like, well, shit, that's not going to stick. And it did. And it was like a wonderful pregnancy. You're just like, okay, well, I don't get this anymore because I could like eat exclusively kale and like salmon and be like absolutely zen and be perfectly balanced piece-wise and then still not get pregnant and then be in an absolute yard sale and get pregnant. So yeah, as I said, it's imprecise, and what an exciting, like, to be on that
Yeah.
journey and to find that out. Can you talk a little bit about how your pregnancy was
I
and how
had
that felt for you?
a fairly easy pregnancy. Um, yeah, super easy actually. Flora was not a big baby, so I never got very
Yeah.
big or felt a lot of discomfort. Of course,
Right.
like towards the end, of course, you feel a lot of discomfort and you get more and more tired. But I think
Oh yeah.
overall it was a fairly okay pregnancy. That's also why we both, Thomas and I, thought, like, oh, giving birth is gonna be, no
Yeah.
problem at all. Like with so much else in this whole thing, we didn't like look a lot into it. Actually, so after I tested positive for pregnancy, I stopped, throughout IVF, you get more and more desperate. And
Yeah.
at least for me, there were times when I would try to get, gain all the knowledge that I could to kind of, get some sort of grip or control over this crazy process that you cannot control anyway. Um, so with my pregnancy, I just had to let go. I had to really let go of all the stress and all the, control. So I just really didn't look into, a lot of information on pregnancy or giving birth or anything. So giving birth ended up being like super crazy and ended with an emergency C-section.
Oh.
But everything went fine. But it
Yeah.
was quite the contrast to the pregnancy.
Right. Interesting. Yeah. That loss of control is something that we didn't touch a lot on in our previous episodes. I think somebody too, as like an athlete that is typically super in control of your body, can you speak a little bit more on like how you grappled with like that feeling of loss over control and then how you really manage that?
You mean with in the time of IVF or pregnancy?
IVF, yeah.
I
IVF, yeah.
Yeah. So like you said before, I also thought, as soon as we started IVF, it would be like, do one round, boop, and it happens.
Yeah.
Because I was like, I have a super body, of course, when I do this to my body,
Yeah.
I'll get pregnant, no problem.
Yeah.
So it was very frustrating to have this realization that I could not control anything, like literally, nothing. Which was, it was some process to kind of learn to accept that, it doesn't really matter. I couldn't do anything more or less, I couldn't control the outcome at all. So so
Yeah.
literally, I don't know how to say it. It was just like, it was very unfamiliar feeling for me.
Yeah, I had the same experience. It's so interesting to feel, because like I think that when you move into IVF, the perception is that you're in such a controlled medical environment, and that control will translate to success, or like it's okay, like they know what they're doing. This is a magical miracle process, but it's backed by science, and it's like, so you go into it thinking like, I'm going to hand over control to the experts. And then the deeper you get into it, you start to realize that there's just only so many treatments and combinations of treatments that they can offer. And you start to feel like, I have no control over any of this. And at one period during our fertility journey, what I found, there was one thing that I found helpful, and then one thing that I did that probably wasn't helpful, but I still love, but was I went into sort of like alternative medicine. So I did a lot. I got a really great naturopath, and I did a lot of like acupuncture, cupping, and like all sorts of tinctures and just different types of supplements, and this rotating of like, so I kind of felt like outside of the medical process, I could like superimpose a little bit of control over my body by, I did like lots of deep meditation and lots of therapy and like lots of like different like interesting treatments. And then the deeper I got into my fertility process, I got a little self-destructive. And it's how I ended up with like so many tattoos on my arm, because every time during this period where I had like these 6 rounds of IVF in my second period of trying to have a child, I would kind of go through this like interesting process of, you know, these IVF cycles and all these needles. And then I would like go in and I would get tattooed. And like, it was almost like this process of regaining some control over my body and having these things within my own grasp. And like, they're wonderful reminders of like that process and like trying to get through it and how we cope. But yeah, it was, that loss of control in hindsight was like a very, very big, featured very large in my infertility process.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. It's so interesting. It affects people in so many different ways with this. So are there any supports that you wish you had had throughout your like the IVF process? Like, is there anything that you wish you had known going into it that you might want to tell people to pursue during their own fertility journeys?
First of all, that everything is totally out of your hands.
Yeah.
I mean, there's no like direct how to say, like relationship between doing and result. It's like really no. So it's all about really finding something in life that makes you happy and kind of continue doing that. Like that's really the most important thing at all. Because at least you can put something nice into your life, which is gonna make everything it's gonna make the whole process a lot easier, and maybe you can even endure more just by focusing on the things that makes you happy. Because it is a fact that really, if you just like live a reasonably normal life, there's nothing you can do more. I mean, to make it happen. Even though one wishes that if only I could do this, then it'll be the odds will be better. But there's really nothing you can do. That's kind of for me my main advice over anything else.
Yeah, I think that's such great advice. And I think like, I remember like I could never drink pomegranate juice again, because it's like the one thing the fertility clinic would always say, and you're nodding your head right now because I guess we all have to go onto this regimen of pomegranate juice. So you're spending all this money on this like pomegranate juice, and you're drinking so much of it because apparently it thickens the lining of your uterus. And then right after an like the transfer for the embryos, I would eat like the cores of pineapples for the bromine, because apparently it would make your uterus sticky. So I was in this like horrific cycle of fruit and like eating pineapples and pomegranates, and like I can't even look at it anymore. Like I still love pineapple, but pomegranate juice, I'm like out on it, because it was like this thing where you would have to like chug this stuff and then you would
oh my gosh
eat your pineapple.
I need to be honest with you here. This is the first time that I hear those tips, believe me. Honestly, I've never heard those tips, but like I said, I made like a how to say, like a Googling ban for myself, that I could not Google stuff anymore, and it just made my life so much easier when I stopped Googling things. So that's also gonna be my advice: like put down your phone, stop Googling, because the most advice you find out there are not true anyway.
It's not helpful. Yeah,
it's not helpful at all.
Yeah, and it's very individual, right? Like it's like if one thing works for one person, that might not be the thing that's going to work for others, but you also will never know if that worked or it didn't, right? So like with my first, I was eating all this pineapple. So I was like, well, clearly it's the pineapple that got me pregnant. So then it was just this like mind thing that stuck in my head where I was like, well, I got to go eat this like an entire core of a pineapple now after I do these transfers. So it's just like, it is a form of insanity for sure.
Yes.
Well, but sorry, no, you go ahead.
Are we finishing up now?
Well, we can't. I had a few more questions, but I wanted to see if there was anything else that you wanted to say before we started to wrap it up. Yes.
Yeah. So you asked me about like what advice I would kind of, or what was the kind of the what I would wish, what offers were out there or something, but also like therapy. I wish that these treatments came like with almost like therapy integrated or mandatory.
Yes.
Because like I said, the mental side of this is the worst. It's not the physical side, it's the mental side that is the worst. And having someone, a therapist that can kind of, keep you on track is, it's super important. So Thomas and I, we did do that next to the whole thing, but kind of, are on our own initiative, and not that something that was included. But I wish that that was kind of included in the whole treatment package. How to say? I mean, we did get the offer that we could, have a conversation with nurses at the hospital, which I mean, they do a super good job, but they're not like trained psychiatrists or therapists. So, but just having someone, outside of the whole hospital world that can kind of, speak with you about, the meaning of things in a bigger scheme. Of course, there's always, you need someone that actually matches with you, a therapist that matches with you. But then I wish was a thing, that I was more focused on this side of the treatment.
Yeah, I agree. I had therapy throughout my fertility process. It was on my own initiative. I mean, it was suggested, especially after I had so many losses. And, the grief is very, it's all consuming. It's like having a blanket thrown over your, and it's very hard to navigate the rest of your life. And especially when you're trying to go into these next rounds. And I also struggled so much with the idea of hope and being optimistic, because I felt like hope and optimism it just created more devastation. And I found that a difficult thing to do, because you need to be optimistic. You need to be able to envision a future with, with children. But
something that I learned in this process is there's a difference between hope and expectations. And I was a lot in, the, expectation, on the expectation side, I went from, it was not hope, it was, I expect this to happen, instead of, I hope this to happen. I was like, I'm expecting this to happen. And I was always in that kind of mindset, which of course breaks you every time it doesn't happen.
That's such a great point. And I think that splitting yourself off from that is important. I mean, being hopeful and optimistic is good in like reasonable measure. And, you do need to have that fortitude going into it. And you do need to have like a desire, like a deep desire to continue. I think I want to acknowledge all the people out there too, that went through this process and then decided to opt out and said, I'm going to be okay with this. And in many ways, I've talked to so many different people who have been on so many different journeys and had varying degrees of loss. It's the people that choose to walk away from this and continue their lives with grace and, and grapple with that idea of like, I'm going to move through my life without children. Those are the people I find the strongest.
I agree so much with you. That takes even more strength, to how to say, like, be okay with that. To say, like, actually, from now on, no kids, and it's all good. Yeah, I have a huge respect for that. I never got to that point, and that's why I, like you said, became almost like a machine that just, continued down this hole that just got deeper and deeper.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a fascinating process filled with many pitfalls, and some of us are lucky enough to walk out of this with children, and like I am so incredibly grateful. Even we're going through such a nightmare with my daughter right now. She's up most of the night, difficult going to bed, and but I still remain just really oh my gosh, I get to do this. I get to be here for these kids. So it's great. Can you tell us what's next for your family and for your career? I think everybody would love to know what's coming up for you.
What's coming up for us?
Yeah.
So let's start with the family thing. So of course, if you get one successful kid out of IVF, it's it's such a, at least that's the vibe that I'm getting, that is, it's not normal to have only one kid. It's more normal to have more kids. So of course, it's we have to decide whether we want to try again to have more
Right.
kids, or if we're gonna
Yeah.
say okay with having only one kid.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
So that's next for us to kind of
Right.
make that decision.
Yeah.
And on a more professional side, with the cycling, I'm a full-time cyclist this year. Of course, it's different with family. They are very much involved. We're doing it as a team, so we have some races coming up this year. We just went, so I just came home from Kansas a few weeks ago. And that was my first trip. It was 7 or 8 days being away from Flora. Our daughter, who's now 10 months old. So that was the first, to be away from her for that long. But we all survived. But from here, I think we don't have that many races apart. We have a few races not too far away. So everything is good here.
So you'll do a little bit more in cycling, and then do you anticipate going back into dentistry?
Yeah. Definitely. I see this gravel racing thing as a fun little adventure, just
Amazing.
trying out something new, something related that I love. And for sure, I will go back and work as a dentist at some point.
Okay. Well, what an incredible life you are living, and what an incredible career you've had, and what a wonderful family you've created. It's just like, I just have found your journey so fascinating. And I just wish you all of the best in whatever you choose next for yourself and for your family.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure to be here, and I'm sending lots of strength and warm hugs to everybody out there, especially those people going through infertility treatment, because it's not easy.
It isn't easy. Never is. Well, thank you so much for taking the time today. It was wonderful to connect with you.
Sure. Thank you so much.
Okay.